I took the night shift gig at St. Agnes Cemetery because it paid better than slinging coffee. And honestly, I like the quiet. No customers yelling, no rush hour chaos. Just me, a flashlight, and a bunch of dead folks who don't talk back. The place sits on a hill outside town. Fog rolling off the woods like it's got nowhere else to go. Tombstones jutting up like crooked teeth. My first night I figured I'd stroll the paths, check for vandals, and clock out by dawn. Easy money. Then I opened my locker in the groundskeeper's shed and found the rules. It was a crumpled paper taped inside, scrawled in shaky black ink. Rules to survive. 5 lines stared back. If you see someone standing by a grave at 3 a.m., don't approach them. Some tombstones don't have names. Avoid them. If a grave is freshly dug but has no flowers, never go near it. The shadows move differently here. Don't follow them. Always leave before midnight. I laughed, figuring some old-timer left it to mess with the new girl. What a load, I muttered, tossing it on the bench next to my thermos. Cemeteries are creepy enough without dumb pranks. The air was cold that night, sharp against my cheeks as I started my rounds, boots crunching gravel. Fog clung low, swallowing the bases of crosses and angel statues, their faces half hidden like they were watching me. Around 3 a.m. I saw it, a figure standing by a grave near the old oak. Still a stone had bowed. Rule #1 flashed. Don't approach them. But my gut said check it out. Vandals don't just stand there, right? I took a step closer, flashlight beam trembling, and called. Hey, you okay? No answer. Just a raspy whisper curling through the mist. Anna. My name. Low and wet. Like it came from under the dirt. I froze. Heart slamming. The figure gone when I blinked. Nothing but fog and an empty plot. The whisper lingered, brushing my ears, and I swung the light around, catching shadows stretching across the path. They didn't match the stones. Too long, too thin, slithering like snakes toward me. Rule #4 hit. The shadows move differently here. Don't follow them. But I stepped back, watching one curl around a headstone, black and oily, dripping onto the grass. What the hell? I breathed, stumbling away, the ground creaking underfoot like it was hollow. Back at the shed, I locked the door, breath fogging in the dim light, hands shaky on my thermos. The rule sat there, ink smudged, daring me to laugh again. I didn't. Outside, a low moan rose, faint, guttural, rumbling up from the earth, shaking the shed's windows. I peeked through the blinds. Fog swirled thicker, and the nameless tombstone loomed closer than it'd been before, his blank face slick with dew, or maybe something darker. Rule #2. Some tombstones don't have names. Avoid them. My stomach twisted. I hadn't even clocked it on my walk. The clock ticked toward midnight. Rule #5. Always leave before midnight. And I grabbed my keys, ready to bolt. But a shadow slid under the door, pooling black on the floor. Slow and deliberate. It stretched toward me, claw-like, and I kicked at it, the air hissing as it snapped back. A fresh grave caught my eye through the window. No flowers, just loose dirt piled high, humming faintly like a distant engine. Rule #3. If a grave is freshly dug but has no flowers, never go near it. I hadn't, but it was there now, closer than any plot I'd mapped. Footsteps scraped outside, slow, dragging, circling the shed, gravel crunching too loud in the silence. I held my breath, flashlight off. The moan swelling into a chorus, voices overlapping. Anna, Anna. Not one, but dozens, whispering my name. The clock struck midnight, a dull chime echoing from the chapel, and the shed shook, once hard, like something massive shifted below. I gripped the rules, paper crinkling, my laugh long gone. This wasn't a job anymore. It was a trap, and those rules weren't a prank. They were all I had left to survive the night. I didn't sleep after that first night. Just sat in my apartment, staring at the rules that stuffed in my pocket, the paper damp with sweat or something worse. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Thermos coffee gone cold. The whispers still buzzing in my ears like static. Hannah, low and wet, like they'd crawled out of the ground. I should have quit right then, but rent was due, and I'm stubborn as hell. So I went back to St. Agnes the next night, flashlight heavier in my grip, telling myself it was just a weird shift. Cemeteries played tricks, right? The fog was thicker, clinging to my legs as I stepped onto the gravel path, the shed's light flickering like it was dying. I checked the clock. 10 p.m., plenty of time before midnight. Rule #5 nagging at me. Always leave before midnight. The nameless tombstone was closer now. Maybe 10 feet from the shed. Its blank face glistening, wet streaks trailing down like tears. Rule #2. Some tombstones don't have names, avoid them. I turned away, but a rasp scraped the air. Anna! Sharp from its direction, and I froze, my name echoing off the stones. I shook it off, muttering, "Screw this," and started my rounds, flashlight cutting through the haze. The flowerless grave was still there, dirt piled high, no shovel marks, like it dug itself. Rule #3. If a grave is freshly dug, but has no flowers, never go near it. A faint hum pulsed from it, low and steady, vibrating my boots. I stepped back, but shadows spilled from the hole. Black, oily, stretching toward me like fingers. Rule #4. The shadows move differently here. Don't follow them. I didn't. But they curled anyway, brushing my ankle, cold as ice, and I bolted down the path. The cemetery logs were my next move. Old binders in the shed, dusty and warped. Some pages stuck together with something sticky. I flipped through, hands trembling, finding names of past keepers. John H., missing 92. Clara T., quit 98 after. Shadows got loud. One entry smeared with brown. Red, the nameless take what they call. Don't break the rules. My gut twisted. This wasn't a prank. It was a warning, and I'd already screwed up half of it. A thud hit the shed door, slow, heavy, like a fist testing the wood. I peeked out, nothing but fog, and that damn tombstone. Closer again, 5 feet now. Ben, the day shift guy, showed up early next night. All grins and dumb jokes. Heard you had a spooky one, Hannah. Ghosts messing with you. I shoved the rules at him. Voice tight. Read this and tell me it's funny. He skimmed it, chuckling. 3 a.m.? Shadows? You're nuts, but promised to check it out. At 3 a.m., I saw him through the shed window, strolling toward a figure by the oak. Rule #1. If you see someone standing by a grave at 3 a.m., don't approach them. Benno! I yelled, banging the glass. But he waved me off, cocky as hell. The figure turned, tall, gaunt, face a blur, and Ben screamed, a wet choking sound, swallowed by the fog as he vanished. I ran out, flashlight shaking, gravel crunching too loud, but he was gone. No blood, no tracks, just the oak creaking overhead, branches swaying with no wind. Shadows slithered across the path, faster now, pooling under my feet. Rule #4 again, and I stumbled back, heart slamming. The flowerless grave hummed louder, dirt shifting like something was climbing out. I turned to run, but a whisper hissed, "Anna," from behind a nameless tombstone now 3 feet from me, its surface rippling like water. Back in the shed, I locked myself in, breath fogging the cold air. The logs opened to Clara's last page. Found a crypt. Don't go in. They watch from there. My next shift, I couldn't shake it. Grabbed a crowbar and headed out. Fog so thick I could barely see the stones. The shadows moved again, curling ahead like a trail. Rule #4, screaming not to follow. But I did, tracing them to a sunken crypt, its iron door ajar, mist leaking out like breath. A moan rumbled inside. deep, hollow, shaking my bones, and I gripped the crowbar tighter. Inside, the air stank of rot, walls slick with black mold, carvings etched deep, a towering shadow swallowing stick figure souls, its eyes gouged red. Whispers filled the space. Anna, Anna. A dozen voices, wet and overlapping, drilling into my skull. I swung the light. A nameless tombstone stood in the center, pulsing faintly, my reflection in it showing black, hollow eyes staring back. Rule hash 2 broken just by looking. My nose bled, warm and coppery, dripping onto the stone, and it drank it, the pulse quickening. Footsteps scraped behind me, slow, dragging, and I spun, light catching a figure in the doorway. Ben, or what was left of him. His face was gone, just a blank stretch of skin, arms dangling, shadows oozing from his chest. Anna, he rasped, her voice now, not his. Rule hash 1 haunting me again. I swung the crowbar, cracking his shoulder, sap like blood spraying, but he lurched closer, hands clawing. The crypt shook, carvings glowing red, and I ran, tripping over roots that weren't there before. The fog alive with whispers. Back at the shed, the clock hit 11:58, rule hash 5 ticking down, and I grabbed my keys. But the flowerless grave was outside now, inches from the door, humming so loud my teeth ached. Shadows poured from it, flooding the shed, cold and wet, wrapping my legs. I kicked free, slamming the door, but a thud rocked the roof. Something heavy pacing above, claws scraping tin. The nameless tombstone pressed against the window, glass cracking, its blank face staring in. Ben's radio crackled from my bag. Static, then her voice. Anna. Clear. Hungry, layered with his scream. I smashed it, pieces scattering. But the whispers grew. You're mine. Not from the radio, from inside my head. The log said the Nameless took Clara after she stayed past midnight. Rule hash 5. And I knew I couldn't keep breaking them. The crypt was its heart. The rules its trap. And it wanted me next. I clutched the crowbar, the shed trembling, fog seeping under the door, the night stretching endless. I wasn't running anymore. The shed was a cage, the whispers clawing at my brain. Anna, and that damn flowerless grave humming outside like a heartbeat. Rule hash 5 was toast. Always leave before midnight. The clock ticking past 12. The air thick with fog and rot. I'd broken every rule but one, and the Nameless knew it. The crypt was its lair. The log said so. And if I didn't end this, it'd take me like it took Ben. I grabbed a crowbar, a bag of salt from an old kit in the shed, some trick I'd read about, and headed out, boots crunching gravel, the cemetery alive around me. The fog swallowed my flashlight beam. Tombstones leaning closer, their edges wet and red. A shadow lashed out. Rule hash 4. The shadows move differently here. Don't follow them. Slicing my arm, cold and sharp, blood dripping onto the path. I swung the crowbar, air hissing, but it snapped back, more pooling ahead, guiding me to the crypt. The door hung open. Mist pouring out, a moan rumbling deep. Low. Guttural, shaking my bones. I stepped in. Salt heavy in my pocket, the carvings glowing red now, pulsing like veins. Whispers hit heart. Anna, Anna. A chorus, worried and ragged, drilling into my skull. Rule hash 2. Some tombstones don't have names. Avoid them. The nameless stone in the center flared. My reflection's black eyes staring back. Nose bleeding again, warm and thick. I looked away, but the ground split. Graves cracking open, dirt spitting up, and it rose from the mist. The Nameless, a skeletal shadow, tall as the crypt, eyes glowing white, claws dripping black ooze. Mine. It rasped, voice splintering my thoughts. It lunged, claws slashing. I dodged, crowbar cracking its arm, sap spraying, sizzling on the stone. The flowerless grave's hum swelled outside. Rule hash 3. If a grave is freshly dug, but has no flowers, never go near it. And roots burst through the floor, coiling my legs, thorns biting deep. Get off! I yelled, breaking rule hash 1's echo. If you see someone standing by a grave at 3 a.m., don't approach them. As Ben's corpse staggered in, eyeless, mouth gaping, shadows oozing from his chest, he grabbed my arm, cold and wet, whispering, "Anna." Her voice through his lips. I tore free, salt spilling from my pocket. I scooped it, hurling it at the Nameless. It screeched, a sound like glass shattering and flesh tearing, ash flaking from its ribs as the salt burned. Shadows whipped faster, slicing my cheek, blood mixing with sap on the floor. The crypt shook, nameless tombstones pulsing red, air warping, graves outside vomiting mist. The hum deafening now. Ben lurched it again, hands clawing, and I slammed the crowbar into his skull. Crack, his blank face splitting, black ooze gushing, body crumpling. The Nameless towered closer, claws inches from my throat. "You mine," whispers fracturing my head, tempting me to answer. I bit my tongue, tasting blood, and poured salt in a circle around me, hands shaking. It hissed, claws raking the air, burning where salt touched, ash swirling thick. "Not yours," I spat, voice raw, and jammed the crowbar into its chest. Metal sank deep, sap exploding, its scream shaking the walls, rocks tumbling, road slashed from the floor, thorns piercing my legs. I kicked, salt scattering, the circle breaking. It grabbed me, claws sinking into my shoulder, cold fire searing through. My vision doubled, the Nameless stone's reflection showing my eyes glowing white now. "Now, Anna," it whispered inside my skull, and I swung wild, crowbar cracking its jaw, teeth scattered, ooze splattering. The flowerless grave's hum peaked, earth splitting wider, shadows flooding in. Rule hash 4 again, everywhere now. I yanked across from the wall. An old iron thing rusted, and stabbed it into the Nameless chest. Salt clinging to the metal. It roared, ash erupting, claws thrashing, then collapsed, mist swallowing its form, the crypt stilling. Grace outside fell silent, the hum fading, tombstones dulling to gray. I staggered out, blood dripping, shoulders screaming, the fog thinning under a real moon. No extra glow, no whispers. The shed loomed ahead, door hanging open, my flashlight dead on the path. I sank against it, breathing hard, salt caked on my hands, the crowbar slick with ooze. It was over. Had to be. The Nameless was gone, burned out. The rules grip loosening, but my scratches pulsed, black veins creeping under the skin, and a faint whisper brushed my ear. "Anna." Soft, distant like a promise. I wiped the blood from my face. The cemetery too quiet now. Shadows still in the corners of my eyes. Maybe I'd won, or maybe I just pissed it off more. I stumbled out of the crypt, crowbar dragging on the gravel, my shoulder throbbing like hell, blood and sap mixing down my arm. The cemetery was quiet, too quiet, no whispers, no hum. Just the wind rattling dead leaves across the tombstones. The fog thinned, the real moon hanging pale and normal. No extra glow to freak me out. Rule hash 5's midnight curse felt broken. I'd burned the Nameless to ash, salted it down, and watched it dissolve. That had to be it, right? I limped to the shed, grabbed my stuff. Keys, thermos, the rules, and torched the paper in a trash can, flames licking it to black curls. Good riddance, I muttered, voice hoarse, and peeled out in my truck, St. Agnes shrinking in the rear view. I quit the next day, called the supervisor, said I'd had enough, and didn't care about the paycheck. Moved to the city, a cheap apartment downtown where horns and lights drowned out the silence I'd grown to hate. Got a gig at a warehouse, holding boxes. Mindless, safe. No graves or shadows to deal with. The scratches on my arms scabbed over. 3 jagged lines like claw marks, itching under my sleeves. Nights for beer and TV, trying to forget Ben's eyeless face, the nameless claws. But sleep brought dreams. Fog choking Crypt, whispers calling. Anna! Rule #1 nagging. If you see someone standing by a grave at 3 a.m., don't approach them. I'd wake. Sweaty, the scratches warm, pulsing faintly. A week in, my neighbor, an old guy with a limp, mentioned something offhand. Saw a weird stone in the park last night. No name on it. Just sitting there. Rule #2 hit me. Some tombstones don't have names. Avoid them. And I laughed it off shaky. Probably kids messing around, I said, but my stomach nodded. That night, fog rolled in. Thick, sour seeping under my door. Like it had a mind of its own. I bolted it shut, but a shadow slid across the floor. Long, claw-like. Rule #4. The shadows move differently here. Don't follow them. It vanished when I blinked. But the air stayed heavy, cold as the crypt. Sleep got worse. Dreams of a flowerless grave. Dirt piling itself, humming low. Rule #3. If a grave is freshly dug but has no flowers, never go near it. I jolt awake, counting to 10, trying to shake the whispers. Anna. That lingered after. The scratches bled one night, black sap staining my sheets. Not blood, and I scrubbed them clean, cursing under my breath. My radio crackled during a storm. No station, just static spitting. Anna. Her voice soft and hungry. I yanked the plug, hands trembling. The sound echoing in my skull anyway. Work kept me sane. Boxes don't whisper. But a coworker left an old newspaper on the break table. Some blog leak about St. Agnes. Gravekeepers vanish after surviving. Rules don't save you. My gut dropped. Clara, Joan, others all gone eventually. I checked my phone later, a selfie from the warehouse. My eyes glowed faintly in the flash. White for a heartbeat, then normal. No way, I said, deleting it fast. But the scratches flared, sap oozing onto my fingers, sticky and warm. Fog hit hard one night, choking the city streets, and a thud rattled my ceiling. Slow, pacing, like claws on tin. I grabbed a kitchen knife, heart pounding, but the window showed nothing. Just mist and streetlights. A shadow stretched across my wall, too long, curling like roots. Rule #4 again, and I swung at it, blade clanging on plaster, the shape snapping back. The flowerless grave flashed in my mind, humming. And I poured salt at the door. Old habit now, but it melted into black sludge, stinking of rot. A knock came, soft, rhythmic. Anna, it's me. Ben's voice, low and wrong, layered with hers. Ruler #1 burned. Don't approach. But I peeked through the blinds. Fog pressed close, a figure swaying, tall, faceless, shadows trailing like smoke. The scratches bled harder, sap dripping to the floor. My reflection in the knife showing hollow eyes staring back. Rule #2's nameless curse creeping in. Stay out, I whispered, voice cracking, and the knocking stopped, replaced by a hum vibrating the walls. I sat there, knife in hand, fog clawing at the windows. The city no safer than the cemetery. The Nameless wasn't gone. It marked me, followed me, and those rules weren't protection. They were bait. My shadow twitched again, claws curling, and I knew it wasn't over. It'd wait, patient as death, whispering my name till I broke. I sat in my apartment, knife gripped tight, the fog pressing against the windows like a living thing. The scratches on my arm bled sap, black, thick, dripping onto the floor. Rule #2's curse alive. Some tombstones don't have names, avoid them. A hum started outside, low and steady, like that flowerless grave. Rule #3. If a grave is freshly dug but has no flowers, never go near it. Vibrating through the walls, my teeth aching. I stood, shaky, and peeked out. Nameless tombstones sprouted in the street, wet and gleaming. Shifting closer, a shadow stretched across the room, claws curling, roots digging into the floor. Rule #4. The shadows move differently here. Don't follow them. It moved anyway, brushing my leg, cold as death. The hum swelled, and a thud hit the ceiling, dragging footsteps, claws scraping, echoing the nights I'd broken. Rule #5. Always leave before midnight. Folk seeped in, sour and thick, a figure swaying outside. Then, faceless, whispering, Anna. Rule #1. If you see someone standing by a grave at 3 a.m., don't approach them. I didn't, but he tapped the glass, slow and wet. The mirror caught my eye. My reflection's eyes glowed white, hollow. The Nameless staring back. No, I gasped, knife slipping, and the tombstones crashed through the walls, cracked, Nameless oozing red. Meine. Her voice rasped inside my skull, and I answered, yes. All rules shattered. Shadows lashed, coiling my arms, sap flooding my veins, my skin hardening like stone. The hum deafened. Fog swallowing the room. The city gone. Replaced by St. Agnes, graves splitting open. I'm still in the cemetery, the Nameless now me, my voice whispering, Anna, calling from the fog, from the Nameless stones. The rules were bait, not salvation, and I'm their keeper now, waiting. If you hear your name at 3 a.m., see shadows twist, or pass a grave without flowers, run. I'll find you anyway, patient as dirt, my claws dripping, my eyes glowing through the mist.